If your resume still has some of these things sitting on it, that might be exactly why it's getting skipped over. Stay with me, because I'm walking through every one of them, and I'd bet good money at least 3 of these are on your resume right now without you even realizing it. Hey, it's Dre. I've spent years on the hiring side of this industry, building out compensation structures, sitting in on hiring reviews, watching resumes get sorted into yes, maybe, and no piles in under a minute. So when I tell you what gets a resume pushed to the bottom of the stack, I'm not guessing. This is what actually happens once your resume lands on the other side of that inbox, often before a human even lays eyes on it. Before I get into the list, if you want more of this, the stuff that usually only gets explained to you after you've already been rejected a dozen times, go ahead and subscribe, because this channel is built entirely around pulling back that curtain. Let's start with the resume itself. In a market where a single opening can pull in hundreds of applicants, your resume isn't really a summary of your career anymore. It's a filter. It's the first and sometimes only impression you get to make before a human ever hears your voice. Long before that human look happens, most resumes pass through some kind of automated system first, which means the document has to work on 2 different audiences at once, a machine and a person, and it has to survive both. So every choice on that page is either working for you or quietly working against you. Here's where most people go wrong. First, drop the bright colors and heavy graphics. A little color used carefully, a job title in a deep blue, maybe a subtle accent, that's fine. And I actually recommend some restrained use of it. But once you start adding bold color blocks, charts, or clip art, you're pulling attention away from the one thing that actually matters, which is whether you're qualified for the role. A resume is a professional document first, and you will get judged for treating it like a flyer, even if you think it shows personality. It also tends to look worse than you expect once someone prints it out for an in-person interview panel, where color often washes out or shifts entirely. The one exception is creative work. If you're a designer or an art director, some visual flair is actually expected, because it doubles as a work sample. For almost everyone else, keep it clean and let your experience do the talking. While we're talking visuals, get rid of any proficiency graphics, those little bar charts or dot ratings people use to show how skilled they are at something. It feels like it's showcasing your abilities, but from the hiring side, it usually backfires. If you rate yourself 3 out of 10 on a skill that happens to be a core requirement for the role, you've just handed us a reason to screen you out before we've even talked to you. Beyond that, those graphics tend to render inconsistently once a resume gets opened on a different device or converted by a system. So what looked clean on your screen can turn into a garbled mess on someone else's. It's better to stay vague and let that get assessed in conversation, where you can add context. Just don't swing the other way and claim skills you don't actually have. Vague is fine, dishonest isn't. Next, lose the columns. Multiple column layouts look sharp to the human eye, but a lot of applicant tracking systems read left to right, and some of them struggle badly with multi-column formatting. If your skills are split across 2 or 3 columns, there's a real chance the system only picks up what's in the first one, and the rest effectively disappears. That matters not just when you first apply, but later too. Recruiters often go back into old applications months down the line and search by keyword. If half your skill set never got indexed, you become invisible to a search that could have surfaced you. The same caution applies to text boxes and embedded tables, which can behave the same way. So it's worth saving your resume as a simply formatted document and doing a quick check of how it looks when converted, rather than assuming your layout survives the trip intact. A single column layout is a small change that protects you both now and later. Photos are next. And this one depends heavily on where you're applying. In the US and most of North America, including a photo tends to work against you. It can unintentionally signal that you're not familiar with local norms, and it opens the door to bias that has nothing to do with your qualifications. In plenty of other regions, a photo is completely standard and expected. So the rule here isn't universal. It's about knowing what's customary wherever you're actually applying and staying consistent with that. A professional headshot still has its place elsewhere, like a networking profile. It just doesn't belong on the resume itself in a market where it isn't expected. That brings us to personal identifiers in general. Anything referencing your age, marital status, whether you have children, your religion, or anything else in that territory. I want to pause here for a second because this next part touches on employment law, and laws vary a lot by state and by country. So treat this as general guidance, not legal advice. If you need something specific to your situation, that's a conversation for an employment attorney. Generally speaking, though, in the U.S., these categories are legally protected, which means they're not supposed to factor into a hiring decision at all. Some employers will separately ask you to voluntarily disclose certain demographic information through an official form during the application process, and that's a different thing entirely. That data gets handled separately and isn't meant to reach the hiring manager reviewing your resume. Putting that same information directly on your resume just hands an employer an easy, low-effort way to make an assumption they're not supposed to be making. You're not obligated to disclose any of it, and leaving it off protects you. If any of this feels like it's contradicting what you assumed a good resume looked like, that's kind of the point of this channel. Most of what people think helps them was never actually tested against how hiring really works. If that's landing with you, tell me in the comments which one of these surprised you the most, because it helps me figure out what to dig into next. Moving on, check your email address. I still come across some genuinely rough ones. Addresses that clearly got created back in high school or college and never got updated. If yours has a nickname, a birth year, or anything remotely unprofessional in it, take 5 minutes and set up a clean one using some version of your actual name. First and last name together is usually the safest bet. It costs you nothing, and it removes one more reason for someone to form an opinion about you before they've read a single line of your experience. Next, drop your full home address. All a hiring team actually needs is your city and state, or the equivalent where you're located. You don't need to give a full street address. Nobody's mailing you anything, and all a specific address does is create more surface area for unconscious bias, like assumptions about your commute distance. If relocation is part of your plan, a short note saying you're open to relocating does more useful work than your current street address ever would. That said, don't remove location entirely, even if you work remotely. Employers still want to know your general time zone since it affects scheduling and team overlap. And depending on the role, your physical location can actually determine whether they're legally set up to employ you at all. You generally can't work a domestic role for a company from a country where that company has no ability to legally hire. Next up, trim your work history. In most cases, employers care about your last 10 years, and realistically, your last 5 matter most. Anything further back than that reflects a version of the job market and a version of your skill set that's probably outdated anyway, especially in fields where tools and platforms shift every couple of years. Unless a posting specifically asks for 2 decades of experience, or you're going for a senior executive role where that history carries weight, you don't need to drag your entire career onto one page. Along the same lines, drop internal jargon and acronyms specific to your current company. If a recruiter outside your organization wouldn't recognize the term, chances are other hiring managers won't either. And every second someone spends decoding your resume is a second they're not spending being impressed by it. Education is another area where people tend to overshare. You don't need to specify the exact school within a university, just the university and the degree. Minors are fine to mention briefly, but they're not worth a lot of real estate. Employers weigh them lightly at best. Same goes for GPA. If you're more than a few years removed from graduation, drop it entirely. Nobody's going to ask, and if it somehow comes up, you can mention it in conversation. The exception is if you're early in your career, within roughly your first 3 years out of school. In that window, GPA and internships can help fill in a thin work history, so it's fine to keep them until you've built up enough real experience to let them go. Relevant certifications are a different story, though. Those are worth keeping regardless of how long ago you earned them, as long as they're still active and still connected to the role you're going after. Next, cut the phrase "references available upon request." It's assumed. If an employer wants references, they'll ask you directly, and reference checks in general have become far less common than they used to be. Plenty of employers skip them altogether now. Including that line just uses space you could spend on something that actually helps your case. Same goes for salary information. Never list your salary history or your expected compensation on your resume. Once that number is out there, you've essentially set a ceiling for yourself. And if a company realizes they can bring you in below what they budgeted, that conversation almost never works in your favor. Anchoring a number early tends to shape the entire rest of the negotiation around it, and almost always in the employer's favor rather than yours. Compensation should be handled in conversation, later in the process, where you have more room to negotiate and more information about the role to work with. Next, take a hard look at your objective statement if you're still using one. The old "seeking a challenging position that allows me to grow" line at the top of a resume tells a hiring manager absolutely nothing about you, and it's one of the clearest signals that a resume hasn't been updated in years. If you want something at the top, replace it with a short summary that's actually specific. A couple of sentences about your background and what you bring to that particular role, written fresh for each application rather than recycled from job to job. It takes more effort, but it's also one of the few places on the page where you get to control the narrative directly instead of just listing facts and hoping they add up. Last two things, and these come down to what you list as skills. First, cut generic software skills like basic word processing, spreadsheets, or presentation software. At this point, competence with standard office tools is assumed for almost any professional role, so listing them just takes up space that could go towards something that actually differentiates you, like the specific platforms or systems that are actually relevant to the field you're in. The same logic applies to soft skills like leadership or organize. Don't just label yourself with them, show them. A bullet point describing a project you led does more work than the word leadership ever will. And finally, drop the generic buzzwords entirely. Team player, hard worker, fast learner, anything in that category. Nobody hiring has ever read one of those phrases and thought, that settles it. They're vague by design, which means they tell us nothing, and they take up space that could hold something specific and true about what you've actually done. Swap team player for a line about a project you delivered alongside other departments, and you've said the same thing while actually proving it. So here's the thing to take away from all of this. Your resume was never meant to be your whole story. It's not an autobiography. It's a filter designed to get you through one specific door. Every line on it should be working to get you into that first conversation. Nothing more. Strip out anything that isn't pulling its weight, and what's left is a document that actually represents your value instead of just your history, and gives you a real shot at getting past that first filter and into the room. If this helped you see your resume differently, there's a follow-up worth watching. What you should actually be putting on there instead, because removing the wrong stuff only gets you halfway there. Subscribe so you catch that one, and drop a comment letting me know which of these you're removing first. I read them, and it tells me exactly what to break down next.